Hello YouTube, I always buy these dolls heads at the car boot sale. They're about £2 or £3 normally. This particular one's quite good because it's got eyes and I end up cutting the eyes out to use for a separate project. But this particular one I'm going to turn into the head of Greedo. So the first step was to cut all of her hair off. It doesn't have to be literally all of it. Some of it can be left because I'm going to be going over all of this with aluminium foil. You can see from the underneath of this that they're hollow inside, and that's another bonus with these heads, is that they're really quite strong, but they're also really lightweight. I try and buy these heads whenever I see them really cheap because I know they're going to be useful for future projects. The next step with this was just to cover it with a whole load of aluminium foil, crunch it all up, just to give me this kind of Greedo snout effect. I know it's really loose and really rough at this stage, but it's just a starting point. If ever you want to make a sort of reasonably life-size head of any kind of creature, I really recommend the aluminium foil technique. It's so fast. So this next stage adds a lot of strength to the whole thing. What I do is I tear up a whole load of kitchen paper into oval shapes. The reason I do this is to get rid of all the straight edges of the kitchen paper, otherwise you just have lines all over the place. Then what I do is I add some PVA glue. I use super PVA or wood flooring PVA glue because it's really strong. I just go over a bit of the head and then I put one of these ovals on, and then I go over the oval as well with the PVA glue. And it's just like Papermache technique, but really strong. Right, for the eyes I just rolled a load of aluminium foil into a ball and then I covered it with MILLIPUT. MILLIPUT is a 2-part putty and it sets rock hard in about 4 hours. This means if you're making a ball like I was here, you can keep rolling it every so often to make it an even more perfect ball. This will be cut in half to make the 2 eyes. Next I used the MILLIPUT to make ears and these little things which I think are antennae. I'm assuming because I made Ryu's fairly recently, he also has these kinds of things on top of his head, and they look almost like little ears, but I think they're probably supposed to be antennae. This leads me to think that both Ryu's and Greedo were possibly designed by the same creature designer. You can see that I've attached these dowel rods in, and this just means that I can drill holes into the Greedo head later and then feed these through and they'll stick on really firmly with a bit of PVA glue. Right, here he is at that stage with the antennae and the ears stuck on. I've also added just a little bit of extra aluminium foil to the shoulders to widen them a little bit, and then I've gone over that with the kitchen paper and PVA glue again, just to strengthen that up. I will quite often exaggerate just a little bit some of the key features of a particular creature that I'm making. So with Greedo here, I've made his ears and these antennae just a little bit bigger than they are normally. But I think this often leads to a much better looking figure in the end, much more instantly recognizable. Okay, so I sawed that ball in half that I made earlier. It ended up being perfectly round, and I just used a Tamiya craft saw, which is really good for cutting through the MILLIPUT and also through the aluminium foil. To make the eyes nice and even, it sounds obvious, but you've just got to cut the ball in half as perfectly as you can. Greedo also has a collar which is a bit like a polo neck, so I just made this out of aluminium foil, tied it on with a cable tie while the glue sets and sticks it in place. You can see the shoulders where I've added extra to widen it. I think that makes quite a difference to the whole overall look of him. I have quite a few Star Wars characters on my to-do list ready to be made, so let me know in the comments if you've got a particular favourite you want me to do. Just to let you know though that I do like the weirdest creatures the best. I'm not that keen on just making humans. I like the weird creatures. So here I made a start on all of his bumps on his face. So you can see around the eyes I've just gone with like a thin layer of MILLIPUT first, and then I'm rolling these kind of individual little sausages and just adding them on the top, going around the eyes in a sort of row, and then I'm making smaller ones to go above that in another row, and then another row above that, and then you've got all of those which basically is like rolling a ball and then kind of squashing it onto his head. I'll go over all of this later with the super PVA glue again, so the glue gets around the edges of all of those bumps, and that will really stick them in place as well. The Milliput will stick on, but it'll stick on even better with the glue as well. You can see down here I rolled some sheets of Milliput and I pressed them onto one of those kind of Hessian bags to give that texture, and I've done that for his waistcoat, and I've just done a bit of his sort of jacket underneath the waistcoat as well. Although it takes a while to put all the bumps on individually, I think it will be worth it in the end. Okay, so this is with all of the bumps added, and you can see the white PVA glue in the gaps between all of the bumps. So I put it on really quite thick, and it's basically filled in all of those gaps, but it's sunk in enough that all of the bumps will be able to show up still when I kind of dry brush them later when I'm painting it. The PVA glue is still wet at this point, which is why it appears white. It will actually dry clear in the end. Remember, this is wood flooring PVA glue, or you can use super PVA glue, but normal PVA is not strong enough. You can see that I've added these couple of seams on each shoulder just to give a bit of detail and make it look like there's kind of stitching on them as well. You can see I've also added this extra fold on Greedo's ears. They were just too flat looking before, and he has quite an unusual shape set of ears, so I've added that. On the back of the head here, I've added all these wires. I was going to make all of these out of individual strips of Milliput, but I thought they could kind of snap off if they're quite thin. So what I've done is these wires, and I've just drilled holes for each one and then glued them in place. I think this will be good because they'll be able to kind of bend, so they're not going to snap off or anything, and also you could bend them to change the position of them if you wanted to in the future. On a personal note, Greedo means quite a lot to me because when I was a kid we used to watch Star Wars every Christmas, so that was always nice. But also I had a friend who, when I went round to his house, he had the big walking AT-AT, and I remember him having Greedo, and he got his Greedo way before I did, and I spent quite a long time looking out for him in shops and things, and we got him eventually, and now I've still got him to this day in my collection. I used to take whichever my favourite Star Wars figure was at the time to school with me, and I'd look after them really carefully, but I remember that Greedo would be one of the ones that would come with me to school quite often because he was such a bright green colour and such an unusual shape. He was definitely one of my favourites. Incidentally, I did buy a couple of Greedo figures recently, so I thought I'd just show you those. These are the Kenner Black series, which are really good quality figures, lots of details. What I really love about these two, though, is that this one was done using the same sort of colours as the original Kenner Star Wars figure, so really bright green figure, and I just really love how this one looks, so I thought I'll buy that one. The other figure next to him is more like how you see him in the movie. So if you look at this guy, he's got sort of silvery coloured eyes, a much more kind of dull green face. But yeah, the original one, what I wanted to get was somewhere in between these two, because I do like the fact that in some scenes he does appear really quite green. I didn't want him to look too neutral, but I was mainly going for the colours on the second figure when it came to like the clothes and things that he was wearing. Right, this was my first painting stage to go over a lot of the areas with emerald green. I'm using System 3 acrylic paints for most of the painting on this, apart from I do a bit of airbrushing at the end where I use Liquitex acrylics instead, which is like an acrylic ink. This emerald green though is quite a bluey green, as you can see, and it's particularly dark, which is quite good as a sort of a undercoat. Next I did an undercoat of black on his eyes, and then I added white to the emerald green just to make a lighter version of it, and I've dry brushed that over all of the top surfaces of all the bumps, and that really makes them start to stand out. You can see that the eyes appear quite patchy at this point, but the important thing with doing something that you want to end up looking quite smooth is that you don't put the acrylic on too thick in the first instance, otherwise you just end up with lots of kind of ridges and lines all over it. You can see I've dry brushed on the ears and the antennae, and also a little bit on his sort of jacket as well. just to bring out those kind of high points as sort of brighter areas. Right, I didn't like the fact that his head was the same colour as the jacket underneath. So what I've done is I've airbrushed a lighter green over the whole of his head. And I think this is much nicer, and it sort of ties in with what I was saying about the original Greedo figure that I used to own and what I just showed you a minute ago. I really quite like the fact that his head is a separate colour to the rest of his jacket and things like that. You can see here I've painted his waistcoat, brown undercoat, and then a sort of orange over the top of that to, again, like it's dry brush to bring out all the textures. You can see he's got pale yellow stripes on his shoulders, which is just like the one in the movie. And you can see I've also added silver, which I very carefully dry brushed onto his eyes. And then I've lacquered his eyes as well, so they've got a real nice shine to them. Everything else is just, yeah, airbrushed, which is a really nice effect actually. It's like brought out a lot of the higher points, and it's really kind of subtle. It's probably not subtle on this video, but you'll just have to trust me, in real life it looks really nice. It's also important to me that when I put it with all my other figures and things that I've made, that it's instantly recognisable as Greedo, and also that it's nice and brightly coloured so it stands out well amongst all the others. Right, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hit subscribe if you want to see anything that I post up in the future. Thanks to MILLIPUT for sponsoring this channel. If you haven't tried MILLIPUT, get out and get yourself a pack and give it a go, because it's a really good modelling material. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.